Tonight on Primetime Politics, a newfound spirit of cooperation. Conservatives changed tack this week, promising to work with government to get mutual priorities passed. So what could this mean for Canadians? Will this change in tone help Pierre Poilievre's approval numbers in the polls? The Ottawa Bureau Chiefs will share their thoughts. And speaking of polling numbers, will a spike in Liberal support trigger an early election? Polls analysts Éric Grenier and Philippe Fournier are standing by. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, there was a discernible change in tone on Parliament Hill this week as cooperation became the order of the day. Conservatives declaring the party would support the government in areas it could in order to get things done for Canadians. Now, to that, the Conservative leader did meet with the Prime Minister to discuss how the two parties could move things forward. And going into that meeting, well, take a listen to what we heard from Pierre Poilievre.
On the one hand, there's working to fast-track results for affordability, safety, and security, and asking tough questions to hold the government to account. The latter is not going to stop. We're going to keep holding the government accountable for high grocery costs, out-of-control crime, broken immigration, and our weak economy, which economists say is on life support. That at the same time, we can walk and chew gum, and that means we're going to work today. I'm going to say to the Prime Minister, let's work together to fast-track results for an affordable, safe, self-reliant economy.
And after that meeting, this is the statement we got from the Prime Minister, quote, "Met with Pierre Poilievre today. Canada's new government is moving fast, and we need Parliament to move swiftly to deliver for Canadians. We've put forward bills to strengthen bail and sentencing laws, build up a stronger economy, cut costs for the middle class, and protect Canadian workers. This is an important time to be working together," says the statement, "and to pass the legislation Canadians are counting on." So what does that mean for the government's agenda and what Canadians might expect from Ottawa? Well, to talk about this, I did speak earlier today with Tonda MacCharles, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for Presse, and joining us this week, Mia Rabson, the Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Canadian Press. Okay, so to preface, with all this cooperation, there's still no rainbows over Parliament Hill. This is not sunshine and lollipops, but there is this stated cooperation now that the opposition and I guess presumably the government are working under. What will this change in tone accomplish, Tonda?
Well, we'll see. I mean, is it just ticking boxes? Are both leaders ticking a box saying, we offer to cooperate, we met with them, let's see what happens. What is interesting is that the Conservatives have agreed to move forward on a number of initiatives that have been stalled, bail reform being one. They want to move to pass the government's proposed GST credit for lower income families. Well, actually 22 million Canadians will benefit from it. So some things we'll see move along. And I take Mr. Poilievre at his word. I don't expect necessarily you'll see friendship breaking out all over the place and, cross-partisan, jokes and fun. It's going to be still a tough session because the Conservatives are very concerned that the Liberals may take, they're doing really well right now in the polls, right, post-Davos. And the Conservatives are very concerned that the Liberals might be looking at a spring election. So I'm not counting on, like you said, rainbows everywhere for the next several months.
Okay, Joël-Denis?
Last session, we spent, the government only managed to pass one or two bills, I think, if my memory is correct. That is very little accomplishment to show for. And I think this probably will help adopt more quickly some of the measures that the government has put forward. So we'll see whether this change of tone lasts. The proof will be in the pudding. But so far, I think the pudding looks appetizing for the Conservative because they do not want spring elections. And so I think they will be quite conciliatory, and that will change the dynamics. I don't expect Mr. Poilievre to be a different opposition leader. That's his job, to oppose, to criticize when the government is not doing its job. That's part of our democracy. And I don't think Canadians would agree for him to be very friendly with the Prime Minister, but he's got a job to do. At the same time, the Prime Minister has put some proposals on the table, and if they are going to be adopted at a time when there are many threats coming from outside. I think it's a good thing for Canadians.
Mia, what do you think will change with this spirit of cooperation?
I mean, to Tonda's point, we've already seen some of that happening on the GST bill this week. I mean, it wasn't the Liberals who pushed for this to go faster. It was actually the Conservatives that put forward a motion to fast-track the GST bill through. Everybody supported that. We saw some cooperation even before the Conservative Convention on bail reform. There was a lot of fighting throughout the fall about that bail bill and how they were going to debate it, and now the committee seems to have sorted that out. So we have seen some positive signs. But these are kind of low-hanging fruit at this point. The big one coming up is the budget implementation bill. It is a confidence vote. The Carney government right now does not have the votes to pass it. It probably may not bring it to a vote unless it knows that it can pass it, unless it wants to trigger that spring election, which the Conservatives don't want, the NDP don't want, the Bloc Québécois don't want, the Liberals maybe want. So that's, to me, that's the big one. We already did see also some signs from the Conservatives that they won't just support everything. When Mark Carney introduced his new EV standards yesterday's new EV policies, the Conservative criticism on it was quite sharp and actually not reflective of what industry or environment groups were saying. So they're not going to just support everything for sure, but we've seen some signs. There's still a lot bigger ones to come.
If I may say quickly, I think the government has every interest to make sure that the Conservative Party collaborate with the government to try to stem the separatist movement in Alberta, because if the government is being too harsh on the Conservative Party or rejects out of hand some proposals from the Conservative Party, it could, alienate more Albertans. So that's a, tricky line on which the government has to work on.
Well, although, to pick up on what Mia was saying, the budget implementation bill seems to be the litmus test. How far will they actually go to work with the government to get this passed or not get this passed? Which goes to a point that everybody was hinting at. So let me get there sooner than later. The continuing speculation that there might be a spring election, and part of that is the fact that we continue to see poll after poll, most recently Main Street, with showing the Liberals in the lead. Prime Minister Carney's popularity going up, not down, so his honeymoon continues and then some. What are you hearing about that possibility right now?
Well, no one's going to announce, we want a spring election.
Why not?
But what you do hear is all the machinations around how would they best avoid one? Will there still be floor crossers brought over by the Liberals from the Conservative side or from another party, potentially the NDP, to give Mr. Carney the majority that he would need to govern for the next 3 years now, I guess, because he's been in power now almost a year. So the idea of a spring election, look, it's a perennial parlor game in Ottawa, okay? The election speculation in a minority government comes with the territory. But I don't see that this Prime Minister particularly wants a campaign right now. He's got a whole slate of international travel that he wants to do this year to advance his economic agenda, getting more trade partners, new deals, bringing investment to Canada. And he also wants to move along all the other projects that he's got in mind. And whether or not he can bring the opposition along with him is a big question. To Mia's point about the auto strategy and the going all in on electric vehicles right now, like that's a big play that a lot of environmentalists are concerned about, a big portion of the Liberal base. So I don't see, well, I understand the speculation and why it might be appealing to them to go with the polls looking like they are, and in the hopes of getting a majority rather. I also see many reasons why that might not happen.
Joël-Denis, what are you hearing?
The Prime Minister will have the final say as to whether Canadians go to the poll this spring. And in my sense, as Tonda is saying, I don't think he wants to go to the polls now. I don't think he likes campaigning or debating or answering questions from media on a daily basis. He would rather govern.
Stick needles in his eyes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Maybe not as dramatic as that, but to some form, yes. So I would say that Liberal strategists will have to write a lot of convincing memos to convince Mr. Carney to pull the plug on this parliament. Because he's got a lot of stuff on his agenda. He wants to govern. He wants to, build fast and at a speed we've never seen before. Govern probably at a speed we've never seen before. He's got a lot of the time to do it now. So that now is the time. And there's a CUSMA negotiation that is so important. and he's got a lot of stuff he needs to put the pieces together before he can say, I'm delivering the goods. So I think his preference is to govern, not campaign.
Mia?
Yeah, I concur. I mean, this is not a prime minister who's naturally a politician. Campaigns are not his comfort zone. He wants to govern. He has policies he wants to enact. There are things he wants to get done. To him, a campaign kind of just slows that down. The main way that we end up in an election is if this cooperation that we're talking about doesn't happen, because Mr. Carney, if he thinks he can't get cooperation to get his agenda through the House quickly now, he sees an election. Right now, all of the numbers would suggest the Liberals would win a majority. Well, that's how he's going to get it. So, the acid test really is this cooperation, and we know the opposition parties don't really want an election. So, how they figure out their own machinations to prevent that from happening without feeling like they're constantly propping up a government is sort of what they have to answer for.
Yeah, well, let me pick up with the opposition because, Joël-Denis, you and I were in Calgary for the Conservative Convention last week, and clearly the party's not changing policy right now in order to build upon the base. What they're now leaning in on is this change in tone that they hope will make Pierre Poilievre look more like a prime minister in waiting and the Conservative caucus a government in waiting. Is it possible to change public opinion on Pierre Poilievre, given how baked in opinions are about him already and the fact that Canadians have known him for decades?
Well, we won't know unless we see a different tone from him. And so far, I would say there are minor shifts in tone, and that takes a long time to embed itself in the consciousness of the electorate and the voting public. So that's a matter of time. And, right now, his negatives compared to Mr. Carney's positives are just miles apart. And even if at one point a few weeks ago the Conservatives and the Liberals were neck and neck, the Liberals have taken a noticeable, statistically significant bump up in the polls, not to be ignored. So he's
across
got a lot of
polls too. It's
yes,
not just one; there are multiple
bigger in
polls.
some,
Like,
but
in fact, I was
all.
looking at 338.com, the sort of aggregator, and the whole column is all aligned. Every poll in Canada, every pollster in Canada says that and has marked it. So it's not to be ignored. And I think that, it's interesting. Mr. Poilievre may be taking note of some of the advice he's gotten this week from Mr. Harper, vis-a-vis the external threat to Canada, to our economy, to sovereignty, and cooperating with the government to a certain measure, to make him look more statesmanlike and to make him look more prime ministerial and more appealing. So we'll see.
Can opinions change on him?
Well, I was talking to some Tory MPs at the weekend convention, and they were saying that Mr. Poilievre's tone was, pushing away voters. Now they are hoping that voters will start listening again. But for that to happen, the MPs, the local MPs, will have to go and tell the voters that Mr. Poilievre has a new tone. Please, would you listen to him? And that may sway some people, but it's going to, as Tonda mentioned, it's a big job. It takes months before you achieve something noticeable in the poll. And going back to the polls that Tonda was alluding to, the Liberals are ahead, but also they have an advantage. Their vote is so efficient. They're mostly in urban ridings. You need less support nationally to bring a lot of seats, contrary to the Conservative Party. So that, whether they're equal or ahead, even when they're equal, they could win a majority because their vote is so efficient.
Mia, can opinions change on the Conservative leader?
I think the bigger question is, can the Conservative leader actually change? Because we've seen this for, however long he's been in politics. This is the politician he is. It's his style. It's his personality. And he also has quite a foe in Mark Carney right now. That's what caused him all those problems during the election. And he has not shown a lot of change in tone. He's talking about cooperation a little bit, but there's still the same attacks and question period antics and things like that haven't changed. So I'm not sure how long he could be comfortable changing a tone, because this is who he is. This is the reason the Conservatives even put him where he is, because of who he is. So whether opinions can change maybe depends on how much he actually can change.
I also do wonder about the opinions Conservatives across the country have of Pierre Poilievre, because in Calgary he was able to get the support of more than 87% of the delegates there. But underlying that phrase, delegates there, Conservatives outside of Calgary weren't voting, and there were a couple of Conservatives expressing concern about how deep that support truly is. What do you say to that?
Yeah, no, and I heard the same, even going into the convention, that because there were going to be so many Ontario Conservatives not there, Quebec Conservatives not there, and Atlantic Canadian Conservatives as well. Look, he got a whopping big number. 87.4% was a number that surprised even the Conservative organizers who were organizing to get that number.
Well, the very fact that it wasn't a media event, it was a press release in the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night, right? So that no one would have to sort of display for eternity, you know, a horrible scene if he failed to achieve that threshold. So I think that they were surprised to themselves the extent to which he got the number there, but that was the very strongest base he could assemble for a convention like that. So I've heard the same. You know, I'm sure you guys have. You know that it has quelled a certain amount of willingness on anyone's part to speak out now, because he's got the number. More importantly, there's nobody who came forward leading up to the convention, at the convention, post the convention, to oppose him in any way. And that includes within caucus and outside caucus. There's no alternative leader. Yeah. So they're sticking with him, even if those Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canadians didn't show up in force at the convention floor. They've resigned themselves to stick with him through the next election and see where it takes them.
What did you hear?
Well, it was explained to me that prior to Mr. Poilievre's speech, there was some people who were allowed to vote. And at that time, they was keeping the score. It was about at 81%. His speech swayed some people, pumped it up. So it was, you know, more than maybe 90% or like a range, but it brought down to 87.4% because of the speech. It's true that there were more delegates from the West probably than from Quebec and Ontario, because there was also a convention for Doug Ford. But besides the change of tone, the Conservative Party's leadership under Mr. Poilievre is trying to reach out now to people like Doug Ford, trying to get closer to him. Same thing with Tim Hodgson, the Nova Scotia Premier. So it means that they understand the game, that if they don't change the way they have treated past allies or would-be allies, they're going to be doomed in the next election. So that's something that is changing. But again, that will take time before it gives dividends, politically speaking, to the Conservative Party.
One thing I think that was notable is that the tone shift that they say they're going to adopt is a work in progress for Mr. Poilievre, but they have made a significant change in the leader of their campaign. Their next campaign, Stephen Outhouse, is a very affable person and has already on all the networks sent all the signals to the rest of the party, and that the next campaign will not look like the last campaign. So that's already a big step.
And that was Tonda MacCharles, Joël-Denis Bellavance, and Mia Rabson, part of this week's episode of The Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio, a primetime politics podcast from CPAC. A new episode is out right now. You can listen anywhere you get your podcasts, and you can also watch it on YouTube as well. Well, you heard the Bureau Chiefs reference the polls that might lead to a spring election, so let's continue the conversation there. Well, joining us now are polls analyst Éric Grenier, the founder and the writer of the Writ, and polls analyst Philippe Fournier, the founder and the writer of 338 Canada. Hello to both of you.
Hi, Michael. Good evening, Michael.
So listen, the three of us are getting together here talking a day after Main Street Research released its latest polls. One that says if an election were held today, well, 51% of decided and leading voters would vote Liberal, 36% would vote Conservative, 5% would vote for the Bloc, 4% for the NDP, 2% for the Greens. So a very commanding lead for the governing Liberals. What's behind this? Éric, I'll get you to start us out.
Well, we have seen a number of polls now giving the Liberals a bump ever since Mark Carney's Davos speech. That Main Street number is the highest one we've seen for the Liberals, so it is on the higher end of things. But certainly, if there's one common thread that we can see across all of the polls that really have been conducted and published over the last week or 2 weeks, is that the Liberals are up. The Conservatives haven't necessarily dropped all that much, but we have seen that the NDP and the Bloc have lost a few points, which has given the Liberals enough of a lead. In that poll, it would be a massive majority, but just in general, from all the polls that we've seen over the last little while, that the close race that could have still produced a parliament that looked a lot similar to what we have right now has now turned into one where you would say that if the Liberals went to the polls today, they'd probably be in a position to win a majority. And a lot of that is because of increasing their support in Ontario. That seems to be the biggest difference in some of the polls we've seen over the last little while.
Okay, Philippe, when you look at the numbers, what do you think is behind it?
Well, I wanted to echo what Eric just said about the Davos speech, but also you cannot really divorce that from in the second half of January, we saw US President Donald Trump started verbally attacking NATO allies. And we know it had an effect last year in the voting intentions of this country. And so I think it's just a repeat of that story. That script is running all over again. And as Eric said, I think we should mention it. The Conservatives have been mostly stable. This liberal rise in the polls, okay, 51 may be a bit high, but still this liberal rise in the poll has been mostly at the expense of the NDP and the Bloc Québécois in Quebec. Now, we had 4 polls in the past week from different firms that showed the NDP back down into single digits. And the beneficiary is, well, the Liberals.
Okay, well, with that, we know the Prime Minister is still looking for a majority. We of course, seen 2 floor crossings already, but another way he could achieve that majority is if he were to call a snap election, possibly a majority. How wise would it be, given how high the Liberals, and in particular, Mark Carney, continue to be in the polls, Eric?
It would be a gamble. That's just the way you have to say it. Yes, we've seen a few polls now that have shown the Liberals in a majority position, and certainly if they get 51% of the vote, I mean, Mark Carney's going to, be a hero, a legend for the Liberal Party. But we've seen that as quickly as the polls can rise, we know that the polls can drop. And while Mark Carney's own personal numbers have gone up pretty significantly over the last little while, the fact that they have moved so much in such a short period of time, I think should make the Liberals, if they're thinking about it, pump the brakes a little bit, because their position has improved dramatically over the last 5 weeks, but that's not a given that it'll hold as well over the next 5 weeks. And I think with all of the volatility from Donald Trump in the United States, that you can't really plan out a 5-week campaign and be sure that everything's going to go according to plan. So if the Liberals are thinking about it, yes, the numbers are good for them now. Would they still be good for them on Election Day? Maybe. And that's, I think, the best that you can say.
Okay. Now, say they were to pull the trigger here. Philippe, you were in Calgary along with us over this past week. We saw Pierre Poilievre get this ringing endorsement from the party delegates at the convention last week, more than 87% endorsement from the members that were there. How eager would you say are Conservatives to go to the polls?
Well, the ones I talked to were really eager. Obviously, they know that in a 5-week campaign, the numbers can change. And the numbers can change on the incumbent more so than the opposition in many cases. We have seen several examples, precedents of minority governments going to the polls because the numbers look favorable, only to be very surprised to find themselves on the opposition benches once the votes are all counted. As Eric said, it would be a massive risk. And I think many Canadian voters, especially those who lent their vote to the Liberals, coming from the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, would not be too happy for Mark Carney for going for a majority government because the polls look good, especially given that he is 1 seat away from a majority. I can see many Canadians saying, "Why, you're not happy with a 1-seat minority?" And so it would be a huge risk, I believe.
Okay. Listen, you mentioned the NDP there, and I want to talk about that party right now because, not only do I like you guys in the real world, I listen to your podcast on a weekly basis, and I heard you guys talking about the leadership hopefuls and the fundraising efforts that we have seen from those who want to lead the federal NDP. And clearly we see that Avi Lewis is out in front when it comes to the dollars raised so far. So you think this has implications on the final leadership results. Talk to us about that, Eric.
Yeah, well, we've seen in past leadership races in 2012 and in 2017, the share of fundraising during the NDP's leadership race matched almost exactly the first ballot results. And if that happens again in this race, and we've seen it also happen in Conservative leadership races, we've seen it happen in Liberal leadership races, following the money is usually a good idea. And when you look at the numbers that Avi Lewis put up to December 31st, now it doesn't include fundraising that's happened since the beginning of the year, he's raised nearly half of the money. It is possible that he won't perform as well when it comes to the votes, or he could even surpass that number. But it is rare to see someone so far ahead of the second place finisher. He's nearly 2-to-1 in fundraising over Heather McPherson and failed to win the race, or at the very least failed to have a very impressive showing on the first ballot. It's really the only source of information we have in this race. We don't have membership numbers yet. The endorsements are pretty thin. This is the best source of information we have in this leadership race. and it's a pretty commanding lead for Avi Lewis. So I think that the only conclusion you can make is that he's the front runner.
Yeah, and Philippe, I guess part of that has to do with the fact that when you look at the way the NDP have run their race recently, it comes down to membership, individual membership votes, not a delegated vote.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And also, let's recall that it's one member, one vote when the NDP. There's no point system. There's no regional system. And so for Eva Lewis, looking at this money, you have to think that he got that from several sources. Now, at least what Eric said, if the money share doesn't match the vote share, it's an exact science, but it at least tells you that in the first ballot, you should expect Eva Lewis to be very close to that 50% mark in the vote share, which means that all of the anti-Eva Lewis would have to coalesce under one banner, and that would be Miss McPherson. So again, this race is not over. We still have 7 weeks left, so that's a lot of time. But at this point in time, when the information we have, Monsieur Lewis should be perceived as a frontrunner.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk a bit about that, Eric, this idea that there's still a few weeks left in this race. When you look historically at the shifting support going into a leadership vote, how much time is there for anybody else other than Avi Lewis to be able to confidently say they have a chance of winning this race?
Well, I mean, we can't say for certain how the outcome is going to be. It's always possible that this could be one of the rare races where the fundraising numbers don't end up reflecting how voters behave. I think that would be unlikely. But the issue, I think, is that the deadline for signing up new members has already passed. So there's no more chance to sign up new members, which is usually the way to turn a race around, right? You bring new people into the party. So now it all just becomes about persuasion. But if Avi Lewis has been able to sign up a lot of new members, it's unlikely they're going to get persuaded to vote against the guy they signed up with and who is seen as the front runner. So it really does come to what Philippe said. It has to be about consolidating the anybody but Avi Lewis vote. Heather McPherson and Rob Ashton would seem to be the two candidates who would be closest together on that. We'll see if they end up talking about it to try to build up some momentum behind one of them, McPherson being the most likely. But it is not a race that's over, but a lot of the things that decide a race have already finished. So that's what I think gives Avi Lewis a big advantage at this stage. I wouldn't say he's the overwhelming favorite or anything like that, but if you had to put money down right now, you'd put it on the guy who's raising the most money.
Okay, well, we are watching. Hey, listen, I've got 30 seconds. We're going to give it to you, Philippe, only because you're wearing a special tie for a very special reason. Do you want to address that?
Well, we have members of our podcast. We joked around how they would be interactive TV if they chose the color of my tie, and bronze won. So you have to give the members what they want, and I wear bronze today. So.
There we go. Proof that you are listening to the people that tune into your podcast and tune in here on CPAC. Eric, Philippe, thank you for this. Always appreciate the time.
Thank you, Michael.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Friday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back on Monday. Until then, take care.